December 18th, 2021, 1 week to Christmas. So I want to talk about primarily something today that we haven't discussed much lately. I think I did do a video a long time ago kind of broaching the subject. And I will have some comments on some of the latest political developments tagged at the end of the video. But I want to get into this first because I think it's a little something else. And that is that in this year's National Defense Authorization Act, a certain group of people in Congress managed to get added to it. Well, I think it's now being referred to as a Gillibrand Amendment, but it involves about 5 senators, 2 Republicans and 3 Democrats, to establish an office to study UAPs, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. And so I think this is kind of an interesting development, that this will be put into law. And this is kind of what the advocates, people that were formerly with this group that was called the TTSA, and the 2 people that left, which was Mullen, I guess his name is, and of course Elizondo, Louis Elizondo, we all know him, and Chris Mellon, excuse me, I mispronounced his name, was the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence back during both Clinton and Bush first, or excuse me, second, Bush second, 43, and as administration. So anyhow, just kind of get into this thing here. It basically is it covers a variety of points. There's going to be an office that's established within the DoD for the collection and analysis of data into a central repository, establishing a science plan, build a national priorities intelligence network to study these things, evaluate any information between governments, in other words, to check if it's a foreign government activity, and to provide an annual unclassified report to Congress and 2 semi-annual classified briefings to Congress. So this sounds like a step ahead in the study of this subject. And remember, something of this sort was what's been called for decades by people that are interested in the so-called flying saucer phenomenon, all right? And Mellon and Elizondo and this TTSA group seem to have been able to sell the subject by presenting the possibility that they hadn't excluded that it was a foreign threat, presumably from our near-peer rivals. And of course, that's obviously not the case. We know that it's not that for obvious reasons. That if in the 1940s, late 40s, early 50s, at that time it would have had to have been Russia, had technology that was literally light years ahead of the United States technology, we wouldn't have won the Cold War. We would have been asked to surrender probably. So this is obviously not credible. But and though the whole thing didn't start in 2004 with the Nimitz incident either, we all know that much that study this at all. But it does pose some interesting questions here. By the way, if you like these videos, please subscribe. I need more subscribers if at all possible. Give me a like, which helps out with the algorithm if you just like other people to see that. And any comments are certainly appreciated. So getting on with this, the problem I see here is that since this is not a new subject, and we generally have the opinion that this is what the government has known about this has been kept under wraps for years. And even Louis Elizondo will say at some point, he can say there's a whole lot of stuff he can't say about it because of his security commitments. I mean, after all, he's had high level, top secret intelligence level clearances. And if he did pick up certain information from classified official sources, he's under obligation to protect it. Under the penalty of severe criminal law, which, by the way, does not have a statute of limitations either. So there is that aspect of it. And so we don't know what he really knows, whether he really knows, quote, the truth, unquote, or not. He's also said that when his group was working in the Pentagon, after the years until he went public, that he didn't see anybody much out there to help him or something. So anyway, so we'll see about that. It's an interesting question. But the problem I think it poses for the government at some point is we assume that there really is and has been a what I'll call a project, we'll just call it the project, okay, on this subject that goes back to probably the 1940s at least, Roswell perhaps, uh, pre-Roswell, post-Roswell, I don't know, but somewhere in that time period, the government probably has to have studied these things. I mean, they were a big deal in the government's discussion for at least 5 or 6 years after the time of Roswell, from 47 to 53. The Robertson panel pretty much put out the official attitude that the government has taken since then in 53, which was largely that to basically disinform or quash any discussion of the subject to the degree possible, on the grounds that these things, major flap, could disrupt critical telephone communications that might affect readiness because the government utilized the AT&T at then, which is now, at any rate, the phone company, let's just call us landlines for a lot of their communications and stuff. I think that's a superficial excuse to cover up the fact that they had to say some reason they were doing what they were doing, but I don't think that's the real reason. There was a major UFO event over the D.C., though, in 1952 that did create a lot of public attention at that time. I mean, it is covered in some historical, studies and the newspapers at the time, it in books. It did happen. I mean, when I first heard about it many years later, when I was younger, I kind of discounted it because I didn't. But now that I've looked into the subject, yes, it did happen. And it went all the way up to the president being interested in the subject. It was, so I can't believe that there isn't a real project on it that has existed all this time. And so the question then becomes, well, what do we do? On the one hand, we're sort of pretending like, well, we're just discovering this stuff now. We've got this new committee, this new office, set up. It's going to study it. And they're going to take this vast amount of intelligence data we have that we're collecting, from all the sensors, the satellites, the radars, human reports from pilots, etc. And we're going to fuse this together and study this thing from a scientific point of view. And try to determine whether or not Russia or China are creating. Well, we know Russia and China can't be creating it, but it's been a way to get around let's just say there's been a kind of a bias that's been put in the system there that brands anybody that says anything positive about the subject as somehow not being fully rational. And that was created by a deliberate government program initiated by the Robertson panel in 1953. It isn't a coincidence that prejudiced viewpoint has been so widely promoted that it's become almost a doctrine or almost a quasi-religious belief, right? That there's nothing to see here. But in fact, there always has been something to see here. The other problem is a scientific problem, and that is, and from my background in science, I can definitely tell you that because for most of my life, I kind of bought into this idea myself that this was got to be nonsense. And the thing is that if these things are presumably from interstellar space, who knows, maybe even intergalactic, but whatever, way away from here, nowhere near the solar system, how could they possibly get here and get here with such numbers to create the sightings that have been seen? And all, even if we assume that most of the reports are bogus, still, if 5% of them are real, that's a lot of sightings. I mean, you consider all the unreported sightings along with the ones that are reported but are discounted, it's a lot. And so the result is that it does strain credibility. The speed of light limit. I mean, people talk about going faster than the speed of light. I can assure you from personal studies, going to 1% of the speed of light is a challenging thing for a large spacecraft. Not impossible if advanced technologies that, based on known science could be developed, like controlled fusion, but that is challenging. 5% gets a lot more challenging. Near the speed of light, no known way of doing it. And the problem is, if they're going that slow, it would take thousands and tens of thousands of years to cross from wherever they come from. And just how frequently are planets out there with intelligent life, with high technology, spacefaring civilizations exist, see? So that's one reason why the mainstream scientific community can quite easily be convinced this can't be happening. you know, and like I said, I most of my life I've kind of held to that viewpoint too. Uh, put it this way. Um, but as I studied the subject more, I began to realize, well, you can't deny the facts. When you find out what the government's real reactions were to this, you begin to realize that you smell a cover-up. And so that leads to an interesting question. What agency or agencies or group within the government has actually been managing this thing up till now? Apparently, it wasn't the group that Elizondo was associated with. And does the director, the former assistant director of national intelligence, was he not cleared for this? If he's not cleared, who was? The CIA director? The director of the NSA? Some unknown classified government agency that we don't know about? And if so, who do they report to? Does the president get briefed on it? Does the Secretary of Defense? You see what the Director of National Intelligence? You see, this is the paradox of this whole subject. And maybe people have been fed a bill of goods. Did Roswell really happen? Good question. I mean, let's take a neutral point of view without bias here. All we know is there's a lot of reports that something really anomalous happened and that the government came in like a ton of bricks to cover up what it was. The latest government story on it was a test balloon, part of a program to put a listening device that would float over the former Soviet Union to listen and detect any nuclear testing. And supposedly the actual balloon, as I understand it, that what may have been the culprit here wasn't even equipped with the classified listening devices. It was simply a balloon train that would carry it as a test. And there's even controversy about that was credible or not. But the point is that then we have to believe that the intelligence officer of at the time, our number one bomb group within the U.S. Air Force, the only nuclear capable unit, the ones that bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that unit, was so incompetent he mistook a crashed balloon debris for some kind of exotic aircraft, let's call it. It just seems strange. And it goes on from there. So, again, there's a lot of rumors. I'm sure there's a lot of false stories. I think the amount of hot air white noise around all these subjects. I also have a general suspicion of the crash, UFO crash recovery story, and that I'm skeptical that these guys that can do these incredible space, transits, if you will, somehow crash all the time. And they also conveniently seem to crash in a remote area where the government can recover the debris with perhaps only a few civilians even being aware of it, and can be, kind of intimidated into secrecy, and the stuff can be spirited away to some secret hangar somewhere. It is kind of amazing to me, on the one hand, that this is, that they haven't, none of them has ever really gone down near a major urban area or something. Okay, who knows? So I understand reason for skepticism. Okay, I agree with that. But if any of this is true, the claim, and even Elizondo says that we do have material debris from such an object in the government, but he will say no more. Well, actually, he didn't say that. What he really said is he believed that we did, I believe. So I don't know. That is a good question, and I'll leave that to the future development. But my problem is, it's going to be a question: does this object, does this office have the ability to get all this classified data that's been accrued over the years? See, that is one of the issues that we really have here. And I don't know. That's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I mean, the first report that was authorized last year came out, and basically what it said was we had a large number, over 100, I think 40 something, I can't remember the exact number, of reports that were attributed to government sources, and only one of them was explained away as a balloon, I believe. The rest of them they were not able to explain away. They would explain what they were. It may not explain away, but explain what they were, identify them. And so we really haven't. And the other problem is a lot of the sensor systems we're talking about do involve classified information, and obviously there's a variety of issues that obviously would be an issue. For example, the government would be concerned about anything that would reveal the exact capabilities of these systems, obviously. The other thing is if there's any proneness of the system to pick up anomalous data, which is false. That would also be somewhat discouraging, I think. If your early warning system was putting out false reports of objects entering the atmosphere, for example, and if it wasn't really real, then those might be mistaken for an enemy attack from some. You see what I'm? So that if that would also be an issue of concern to go public, I think. And so you have all these issues, and you still have this stigma thing, this prejudice I mentioned that kind of is out there as well about people reporting what they see. Um, but we do have some seriously good cases out there that have pretty much withstood scrutiny, I think. And then you have a skeptic community, and I say not so much skeptic, but debunking community. Their objective isn't to be skeptical; it's just to disprove everything. Come up with some kind of explanation. And the reason they want to do that is because, again, this violates our known concept of what's feasible under our laws of physics. I mean, I don't say it necessarily violates the laws of physics, but it definitely violates our conception of what's possible under what we know about them. And so it would just be interesting to see how this bureaucratic engagement, in other words, it's quite possible this office may still get shut out of the real data. I don't rule this out at all because we don't know what organization actually controls the real data and who they report to. I mean, again, does the key top officials, President, Director of National Intelligence, CIA, Secretary of Defense, are they all fully briefed into the reality of this subject or not? We don't know. And obviously, they're probably not going to say if they are, right? I mean, because obviously this has been a secret that up till now has been kept pretty rigorously by members of both political parties. I mean, you can go from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama, and they haven't really outlined, although both of them have given hints that there might be something to it, both Reagan and Obama. So, so we just don't know. And it'll be interesting to see what develops as this office is actually created and how it functions and what information it comes out with. I think that's about all we can do, just kind of wait and see what they do. Okay, now before I close this, I do want to mention that, in reference to my last video, that, it does appear that the horrible Build Back Worse bill has been shelved, at least for the rest of the year. Another pass was taken, apparently, to see if they could ramrod through their so-called voting bill, which is really trying to bias the election system in favor of Democrats. And they were not able to get rid of the filibuster to get that passed either. And so I think we're kind of, hopefully, we'll just have to see what develops. I guess this goes into next year, and we'll see what happens then. But as it sounds like as of this time, Manchin and Joe Biden are a bit of an impasse on what can be in the bill. One of them basically wants a $5 trillion bill that's only partially funded. The other one apparently wants an under $2 trillion bill that is funded. And that's a pretty big impasse. So we'll just have to see what develops there. Again, if you like these videos, I'd like you to subscribe. And by the way, I'm going to put a link to my previous video, and not too many people watched it. I thought it had some interesting information about my attitude about the conflicts from key political personalities such as McConnell and Trump, for example, and a few thoughts on one of our key defectors on that January 6th committee. So anyway, I'll close this for now, and until next time.